And these are the ordinance that you should arrange before them. Before we even start, we take this first sentence and break it down. Very, very important. It's a bit odd to start a new chapter, a new paragraph, a new thought with a what do you call it? A connecting word like and these. Very few times do we ever see anything. It's not inappropriate, but you would think, why didn't he just say, these are the ordinance that you should arrange before them? A couple of important words that we'll look at here is this concept of these and the idea of arranging. First, Rashi informs us that the conjunction and connects the following laws in which that preceded it. Meaning the laws of the Ten Commandments that were given at Sinai and the building of the altar, those are connected to the Torah. Now, pretty obvious to us, but this is something that shouldn't just be brushed over quickly. What are we saying, and what is Hashem saying to Moshe in this situation? What were the laws that were given? The laws of Shabbos, the building of the altar, the function of the stairs of the altar, and the Ten Commandments. Why do we have the next group of commandments that are getting ready to come to Moshe off of Mount Sinai? Why does it come after the building of the altar? Why is the altar smack dab in the middle of the Ten Commandments and the rest of the 613? Do you have any idea? Well, the idea is this, is that all of the commandments of God are intended to be at the place of the altar, are intended to be that which connects humanity to the place of elevation of offerings to Hashem. Literally, we know that the commandments, the book of the law, the ordinances and covenants were put in the ark, right? Mm-hmm. And Aaron's rod, we'll find out later on, will be put in there, and there'll be a little jar of manna that we put in there. So the very Torah itself is juxtaposed to the position of the altar. Because you cannot separate mitzvah, you cannot separate Torah from the very act of worshiping Hashem and giving offerings to Hashem. Do you see how they connect? So the idea here is that with the altar in the very center of the Ten Commandments and the commandments that follow next is this beautiful image that these things surround the very altar of Hashem, the place that Hashem puts His name. He says, all of these laws, he states, are promulgated at Sinai. And according to this view from Rashi, also links the preceding laws concerning the altar and the civil laws, which are now being presented, instructing us that the Sanhedrin, the Jewish high court, must convene a place adjacent to the holy temple, the location of the altar. Nachmanides adds that the ordinances which are to be arranged before the Israelites relate to the last of the Ten Commandments. You shall not covet, he explains. If a man does not know the laws related to homes, fields, and other property, he would think that they belong to him and covet and expropriate them. Arrange. The whole idea is arrange them in front of them, is to display it. Put it on display in front of them. And it was more than just the display of written Torah commandments. What does it mean to arrange something in front of them? If you have children, you'll know what I'm talking about. You model your child rearing and the rules that you have in your home, not by having all the do's and don'ts listed on the refrigerator. How is it? It's arranged before them in their day-to-day living, right? So that's the whole idea, is making this arrangement. First verse has to deal with the servant. When you buy a servant, a son of Israel, he should serve 6 years. In the seventh, he should leave to be a free man without payment. If he comes alone, he should leave alone, and if he has a wife, his wife should leave with him. If his master gives him a wife and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children should belong to the master. He should leave alone. Now, when you read this, it kind of sounds cruel, doesn't it? So let's talk about the economy of the Near East community, the Middle Eastern community. Along with livestock, since you didn't have tractors, computers, agricultural turbines and carbines and cowbines and all those things, you had to have human laborers, right? And the best way for you to take care and sort of multiply your productivity is to have people working for you. The economy was driven by this concept of slavery. This is not the kind of slavery that we have seen demonstrated throughout human history, in which whole cultures are taken captive, tortured, abused, and destroyed. This is not the kind of slavery that took place in the early years of the establishment of this country, in which the Civil War ended up having that terrible system torn apart. This slavery had to do with employment. So if you really want to understand the context of it, it was contractual employment. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, what was different is nowadays you go get a job. Rarely do you have a contract in a job that you have to work so long for so many years. There are some CEOs, I think, have that probably, I would think. But the general person doesn't have to have a contract that you work so many years and then after so many years you are able to leave. What this has to do with the son of Israel, we'll understand later on, that you are to not take a son of Israel to be a slave. So is this what we'd call a contradiction of concepts or terms? Well, no, it's not a contradiction of terms. This is referring to a son of Israel that has a debt that needs to be paid, specifically thievery. Let's say that this individual has stolen, and stolen from this particular farmer or rancher or whomever he is, a guy of some means. He has no way to pay back the fee, what law prescribes that he has to pay back a fifth and return portion. If he doesn't have that ability, then the person that the debt is owed to has the right to take him for a period up to 6 years, up to 7 years, to pay that debt back. Now, one would say, well, what happens if the debt is greater and it cannot be paid back in 6 years? Does the guy just lose the deal? Yes. Why is it important that these laws were established by the people of God in the beginning? Hashem is wanting to demonstrate the fact that you were a slave in Egypt. You were held captive, and you were not granted this opportunity to leave after a short period of time. You knew that your debt could be canceled at some time.
This also is an expression of responsibility for conduct and grace.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a whole culture built on justice. I mean, the idea from the very beginning, when Noah is instructed by God to all the people of Noah to establish courts of justice, to have a system of justice. All nations are supposed to do that. Diane?
I don't know if you're going to touch on this in a little bit, but I didn't know that there was a difference between a robber and a thief.
Right.
A robber, I guess, is someone that has to do it because of needs.
Right.
A thief is just someone that does it.
He steals out of his own compulsion, and a robber generally will do that because he's needing to feed his children.
Okay. So
you understand the difference?
Is commanded to pay back one time.
Correct.
But
where a thief has to pay back twice. Does that make sense? Very good point. Glad you brought it up because I wouldn't have.
One is planned, the other one's kind of, a robber kind of plans what he's doing,
right.
And a thief just kind of.
He just takes what he wants and goes with
it's
it.
his. Right.
Well, that's the whole point. It's the breaking of the law of thou shalt not covet. That's what the whole idea of thievery is about, is you shouldn't covet. So, he says, if he has a wife, or is given a wife by his master. Now, what human would say, I have given you a wife, but you can't take her with you? Now, what circumstance would that be? Do you think this wife is a Hebrew daughter of Israel?
No, probably not.
No, she's not. Who is she? She is more than likely a Canaanite that has come into the household as part of the trade system for her to work and for her to be a servant of the household. But she falls in love with the son of Israel. She takes on the God of Israel. She in essence converts and wants to be with her husband, but she is still the property of the master. Why is she the property of the master? The reason why that he hired her was to get married and to have children so that they can have more workers on the farm. Okay? See, it's hard for us to even comprehend this. Right, like livestock. But the difference is they were not treated like livestock.
Right.
They were treated as someone in their home. I mean, here is the prime example. The law even extends to one who is an idolater who is a servant, who then becomes circumcised for the purpose of having Pesach with his master. Right? So he becomes part of the people of Israel and he leaves his idolatry. Right? So he takes on the identity of Israel as a ger teshav. Does that make sense? So that's the whole idea. It says, if a master gives him a wife and she bears him sons and daughters, and the wife and her children should belong to the master, he should leave alone. But if the servant clearly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not leave as a free man, his master should bring him before the judges. He should be brought to the door or a doorpost. His master should pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall be a servant to him, serving forever. Why do we pierce the man's ear? What's the point of it?
Ownership.
Say again?
Ownership. Identification.
Identification. He's identified as one who, put it this way, a son of Israel should never, ever decide willfully to become a permanent slave. Ever, 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 ever.
It's not his to give.
Right. And so it almost is some midrash talks about, because this individual clearly did not shema, didn't hear, didn't listen. If you're that dense not to hear and shema, then a hole should be bored into your ear to indicate that there's something defective here. Something's not right that you would want to be a permanent slave.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, it gave that person, that individual the opportunity to do that. Clearly, that had to be brought in because there were people who were happy in that situation. There are stories of African slaves after the Emancipation Proclamation decided to stay with their masters because they were working for righteous masters and they were inheriting land and they ended up having that land that they could pass on to their children. It was a good place. It was a righteous place to be. So, if a man sells his daughter as a servant, she should not be free as a male servants are freed. If she is displeasing in her master's eyes, to whom she is committed, he must allow her to be redeemed. He has no permission to sell her to another man, since he had power over her. If he committed her to his son, he should treat her as is the practice of the daughters of Israel. If he takes another, he must not diminish her food, clothing, or conjugal rights. If he does not do these three for her, she should go free for nothing without money. He that strikes him, okay, let's stop right there. So who is this talking about? Is this talking about a daughter of Israel? No, it's not talking about a daughter of Israel. It says, though, she should be treated as a daughter of Israel. And if the master, when he takes and brings her into his household, this is a young woman, and at some point when she becomes comes to the place of puberty, he doesn't want to, marry her or take care of her. Then he is to treat her righteously and justly. He can't just dump her out on the street, and because most of the time these young girls were far away from their family, that lived, hundreds of miles or miles and miles away. And so she would not be just dumped out on the street. At the same time, if he doesn't take care of her, then he has to set her free. He can't just keep her and not take care of her.
But take care of her the way he started to take care of her.
Correct. He's got to take care of her properly. And so he's got to commit to her as if she is one of his wives in the home, or like a daughter. Make sense? He that strikes a man and kills him, he shall surely be killed. He that did not lie in wait for him, but it came out before the Lord, I will assign a place for you in which he can flee. A man that schemes against another and kills him treacherously, you should take him from my altar to kill him. So you have a guy, there's two different individuals here. One is a man who strikes a man and he kills him, which is homicide, right? Which is manslaughter. Mm-hmm. You understand the difference? Right. Mm-hmm. The other is plotted willful murder. That's the difference between the two. So he strikes a man, you should surely be killed. That is, it has to be witnessed. Does it make sense? All of these crimes have to be witnessed. So one can't just, hearsay. Evidence does not count in a Sanhedrin court or in the court of Torah law. It has to be witnessed and it has to be properly adjudicated.
What if nobody's there?
Say again?
What if nobody's there at the time?
If no one is there at the time, then later on what we're going to see in one of the portions is that wherever his body lies, that land has to be redeemed, and he's buried there, and no other body is to be, can be considered sacred ground. It's like that community that lives closest to that body has to pay the redemption price for that land. Does that make sense? So it's, at some level, there's some justice. The family doesn't have to put out the expenses of burial. The community takes the responsibility, because clearly this guy is murdered. Say, for example, we live here in Humble, Texas. If a guy is murdered in Atascocita, no one sees the murder, no one has a clue, then the community has to assume responsibility for the person's death and has to pay for a place for him to be buried. That's in essence. We'll learn that later on down the road.
This is for being in the land of Israel.
Correct. Correct. For the land of Israel, not for us today.
And one witness was not enough, right?
Correct. One witness wasn't enough. You had enough. You had to have two witnesses. Right. And they had to be two credible, what do you call it? Chesed. Righteous. Chesedim, right? Somebody that's righteous. They couldn't be just anybody. They had to be somebody who had the utmost, integrity toward Torah.
Again, that was the expression of grace from the law, because the opportunity for two righteous witnesses would not be as plenty as one would think.
Right. Oh, no, absolutely. 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 From my altar, let's see, taken from my altar to kill him. I wanted to look and see real quick. Wanted to see something. Rashi explains in verse 14, explains that the Bible exempts those who intentionally inflict a blow resulting in death, but not schemed or killed treacherously. You see the difference? Mm-hmm. A father who, in his anger, kills a man that abuses his child or children. Okay? A person who schemes out of his anger and hatred for another one to plot and murder someone, they're treated differently. Examples are a court-appointed person who administers lashing to one convicted of a crime calling for his punishment, or a doctor attempting to heal a patient, or a father or a teacher who physically chastises a child. So it's about some level of corporal punishment, or a doctor trying to heal a patient in which the patient dies, then the doctor is not considered a murderer. Okay? We have laws like that today. So anyway, a murderer finds no sanctuary in the city of refuge. So this concept, from my altar, means that a murderer finds no sanctuary in the city of refuge, no protection by clinging to the altar. So we cannot claim, you can't kill me out. You remember the old movies where if you ran into the Roman church, that they couldn't come in and get you, and so you were safe. So this idea you couldn't run toward the Mishkan and cling to the altar, of course you couldn't do that anyway, but if you did.
A foreigner with an embassy.
Right.
They try to run from.
Right, so there was no way that he could keep from that happening. If let's see, verse 15, it says, "He that strikes his father and mother should surely be killed." A strike is a blow that causes blood to flow as a bruise mark, even if it does not result in death. That's pretty serious. Father or mother, the Hebrew and Aramaic readings are father and mother. The Babylonian Talmud explains that the Bible means one or another. So, if he strikes a father or a mother or both, doesn't matter. It's the same. Should surely be killed. Onkelos renders the Bible die in a more specific form, describing the manner of death. So the idea is, if you strike your mother or father and causes severe injury, it doesn't have to include them dying for one to be stoned. But once again, you have to have witnesses. Mm-hmm. And if a father and mother does not testify against their son, nothing happens. Does it make sense? Rarely did anybody ever get stoned in the nation of Israel. Just rarely. It just didn't happen. He that curses his father and mother, he should be what?
Put to death.
Eesh. That's a good one to post at your house for young children. Yeah, teenagers. In verse 17, Rashi explains on the Mechilta, prepares this verse with Leviticus 29. Could someone turn to Leviticus 20, verse 9? Ever who gets it first reads it. Everybody's slowing down. Chapter 20, verse 9.
20.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes. For anyone who curses his father or his mother shall be put to death. He has cursed his father or his mother. His blood falls back upon him.
Okay. What Rashi explains in this, and explains that both passages dealing with the cursing of parents are needed. This idea of cursing the parents, it's more than just saying a derogatory term. The cursing is a complete dishonoring of the parents. It is not just merely a moment of anger or frustration or rage, but this is an adult son or daughter who completely dishonors their parents and causes them irreparable damage or harm. Does that make sense? So this is more than just a kid getting angry and saying, you're a so-and-so, and leave the house, right? So it's more than that. This is very serious business. It says, if a man quarrels and one strikes the other one with a stone or fist, and he does not die but falls idle. What does it mean to fall idle? He's unconscious. Put it this way, he's close to pushing up daisies, pulling down the shades, right? It's not good, but he's not dead. It says if he falls idle, if he rises and walks outside in a healthy condition, the assailant should go unpunished, right? Because he didn't mean to put the guy out and to kill him or to bring him to death's door. Say again?
Maybe he did, but it just didn't happen.
It just didn't happen. That's true. But the whole idea is, you know, you get angry, you get into a fight, and you knock somebody out, and they almost die, but they come back. There's no punishment. Huh?
He didn't finish.
No, clearly he didn't. Right. So it should go unpunished, except that he must pay for his idleness and the doctor's fees. Right? So the idea is you pay for the time the man was down, but our courts are very much the same way today, right? You pay for the time of his idleness and his doctor's fees. If a man strikes his male or female servant with domination, and he or she dies under his hand, he should surely be judged. So you can't beat your slave. So if you have a slave at the house, you can't beat them. So Keaton, you can't beat your slaves at the house. So.
Can't beat them so severely that they die.
That they die. Well, yeah, okay, we'll let that go with that. That's true. That's a big one. But if he survives a day or two, he should not be judged, since the servant is his money. You understand?
That's not good.
That's your property. It doesn't pay you to kill your servant, right? So the idea is if a servant comes back and is okay, gimping around a little bit, you don't owe anything. If men fight and they strike a pregnant woman, and her child comes out, but there is no death, there shall surely be collection as much as the woman's husband determines. I like that. He should pay it by verdict of the judges. And if a death is involved, then you shall impose punishment of life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn or burn, wound for wound, or blow for blow. Now this is the most misquoted text we all know. This is not like Mustafa and the tribes of the Ishmaelites who cut off fingers and hands and lob off ears and God knows what. This is about a balance in justice, meaning whatever you lost, that should be returned. That's the value. Our system of courts today do the very same thing. If I lose a limb in a serious accident that someone else is at fault, I can take them to court and sue their insurance company for the loss of that limb. That's all this is about. If a man strikes the eye of his male servant or the eye of his female servant and destroys it, he should let him out as a free man on the account of his eye. If he knocks out a tooth of the male servant or the tooth of a female servant, he then should let out as a free man on the account of his tooth. So the system of justice is that if you do irreparable harm, for example, if you knock a man's tooth out or his teeth out, at that time of life, there wasn't modern day dentistry, right? You couldn't go in and get an implant and a crown. If you lost your teeth, you severely impaired the guy's ability to nourish himself. This is a very serious thing. If he loses eyesight, you severely damage his ability to be able to take care of himself. So immediately he wins his freedom if you do those things.
So what happens to the person who did the action?
Who did the action? He loses the ability to have that economic benefit by having the slave in his house, because he purchased that slave. Does that make sense?
Well, what about if he awarded a slave in the future?
That I can see here. You talking about if the master...
If this man did all these things to a slave, he knocked out his tooth, maybe another slave he didn't like either, he knocked out his eye, something like that. Is this man allowed to get another slave?
I would think so. I don't see any different, but we'd really have to go back to the Talmud and find out what the actual rabbi's dialogue on some of this is. That would be interesting to find out. Let me see here real quick if there's something.
Well, the end result is going to be if this guy has such a problem that he keeps destroying his profitability, he's going to be ostracized from the community because he doesn't have anything to trade with.
Right.
He won't have any means of income gathering because his fields are going to die.
Right.
Because he has no slaves to harvest them.
I mean, this is a man whose life is going to go downhill anyway.
There's a balance
Yeah.
that's brought by the insanity of a person.
Right.
Yeah, if they just can't get their stuff right, well, it's going to fail.
Right.
That makes sense.
You know, so
It's
in that
like
case, the grace of God once again is established.
It's like the farmer who goes out and works his tractors and doesn't change the oil. You blow engines in them, you have to pay the price. He's going to ultimately pay the price because he's losing this very important commodity. If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox should be stoned. Its flesh should not be eaten, but the owner of the ox is innocent. Now, how is the owner of the ox innocent? Because he didn't conspire with the ox
Right.
to go out and gorge somebody, right? However,
But if
However, if the ox has been in the habit of goring people,
Right. Yeah.
and its owner was warned and failed to guard it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox should be stoned and the owner should be killed. If the amount of money is determined, put it this way, can you imagine knowing that that's the law? And someone says, your ox has gored two of the neighbors. You would go out and kill that thing and eat it.
Right.
Right? You would make sure you butchered that thing as soon as you possibly could. You wouldn't want the liability. That's all it is to it. If an amount of money is determined, he should pay the entire reasonable amount determined for him to redeem his life. This is the owner of the ox, right? Also, if the ox gores an Israelite man or it gores an Israelite woman, it should be done to him according to the same rule. If the ox goring is a male servant or a female servant, he should pay 30 selas to the master, and the ox should be stoned. So it's even more so if it is a slave and it gores your neighbor's slave, then you owe your neighbor for the damages because that is downtime for that particular worker. Does that make sense? Yes, sir.
We have a law similar to that today that nobody really looks at. If you have a tree on your property.
Oh, yeah.
And it falls on my house, it's an act of God.
Right.
But if I said, that tree might fall.
Correct.
I think that tree's gonna fall, it doesn't fall, but you've been warned several times,
Right.
and it finally falls, then you're reliable. For
Correct.
that tree.
Absolutely.
You've been warned,
Told you about that.
you're liable.
Right. Yeah, my wife and I found out what to do. Call us. We're special. We have a specialty in that area. We finally got the tree dealt with, but
Yeah.
there are some trees that you positively cannot kill. I just want you to know that. We try. If a man opens a pit, or if a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or an ass falls into it, the owner of the pit must make restitution. What kind of pit is he talking about here?
Well, maybe.
That's one. But this is more common to travel. And when you stop on the side of the highway, you build a pit to sleep in. You protect your goods. You sleep on top of your goods. You build a pit. You put your goods in it. All right? And you sleep on top of it because if anybody comes by and sees a man sleeping with no possession, it's like, I'm not going to rob him. That's one pit. The other one could be a well. It could be dug for any purpose. But the idea is if you dig it, you need to, what do you call it, fill your own pit, right? So that's an important deal. Now, let me say this. In another Parsha, we will see Moshe request to Hashem to see him, right? To see his glory, his majesty. Hashem doesn't allow him to see him. He just merely passes by. But he does give, one of the things, and we've said this many times, though he does not allow Moshe to see his essence, he allows him to know him by his attributes.
Right.
His attributes are revealed in the giving of the Torah. When Moshe asked to see his glory, he says, turn your back, and the very next words is, take these tablets that I have written upon and bring them back to the people. So we'll read that, and so we'll understand. When we read these laws that seem to be sort of one after another of civil laws of justice, what attributes do we see that reveals Hashem to us? What are the attributes? Mercy was one. Justice another. Right? Compassion. The rights of a human being to be properly,
Value.
the value of human life, etc., etc. So the idea, say again?
Kind of powerful, all-knowing, because God is predicting what could happen.
Right.
He's thinking ahead.
Right. No, absolutely. You see him looking out for his children.
Yeah.
One of the things that it's so easy for us to concentrate on, I think at times, is to see the creator of the universe as being a God full of laws and commandments and precepts. And it's a bit daunting, I think, for some. But we have to always remember that his loving kindness far exceeds his justice. His goodness far exceeds any type of tribulation that he could ever put on humanity. Hashem wants to demonstrate his goodness to his people, and he wants his people to demonstrate their goodness to each other. So, through his characteristics, all of these, though some of these are laws that every nation has, right? Every nation has different laws of justice for their community. But what we see is the fingerprint of Hashem in every land, every nation. Nations that never heard of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, far reaches of the islands of the seas, have laws that resemble these. Why do they resemble them? Not because they were at Sinai, but that Hashem's fingerprint is on it. Deep down in the heart of every human being is a desire to have justice, is a desire to be treated properly, has a great desire to want to live in a community that has compassion and isn't out to destroy. There are some communities, I guess, you could go to that lacks, they're sort of chaotic, but they do have their laws, even though they're chaotic laws, right? If an ox of a man injures an ox of his neighbor and it dies, they should sell the live ox and divide its price. They should also divide the money of the dead animal. However, if it is known that the ox was in the habit of goring and its owner had failed to guard it, he must surely pay for the ox, and the dead animal shall be his. If a man steals an ox or a sheep or slaughters it or sells it, he should pay 5 oxen for the ox of 4 and sheep. So we have this system that is set up to where you're not going to get around paying back for your crime. One of the things that I think is so beautiful about Torah law is this. There wasn't prisons. They didn't have penal systems, right? So the way justice was meted out is if you damaged someone's property, or hurt someone, or you stole from someone, you were going to pay that back. And if you couldn't pay it back, you were to work for that family up to 6 years or 7 years. I like that system. Can you imagine somebody coming in and stealing your 55-inch TV with your brand new Xbox and all of your guns. If you're in Texas, you have to have a gun, right? The insurance company now, whether they pay you after you put down the deductible? Right? But what would happen if this guy didn't go to jail? He had to work and pay all this off. And if he didn't have the money to pay it off with the value times, you know, he'd have to work for you. Can you imagine what relationships would be like in our society? That a person had to come be in your home and be in the home of a righteous person to work for them? That is a cool system of justice. You know, in the day,
Do it again.
say again?
And
They probably wouldn't do it again because they've established a relationship with you. Yeah, yes. So, somebody start with chapter 22 of Shemot, verse 1.
If the thief is found while burrowing in, and he's smitten and dies, there's no blood guilt for him. If the eye of witnesses fell on him, there is blood guilt for him. He must surely pay. If he has nothing, he should be sold for the theft. But if the stolen object, whether ox, ass, or sheep, is indeed found in his hand, and they are alive, he should pay 2 for 1. If a man causes a field or a vineyard to be eaten, or he sends his livestock and it eats in another's field, he must pay from the best of his own field or the best of his own vineyard. If a fire breaks out, finds thorns, and consumes stacks of grain, or standing grain, or a field, he who kindles the fire must surely pay. If a man gives money or vessels to his neighbor for safekeeping, and they're stolen from the man's house, if the thief is found, he should pay 2 for 1. If the thief is not found, the owner of the house should come before the judges to determine whether he put his hand on that which was given to him by his neighbor. In every matter of responsibility pertaining to ox, ass, sheep, garment, or any loss, wherever one says this is it, the litigation of both should come before the judges. He whom the judges declare guilty should pay 2 for 1 to his neighbor. If a man gives to his neighbor an ass, ox, sheep, or any animal to guard, and it dies, is injured, or is carried off, with none that sees, the curse of the Lord shall decide between the two of them that he did not lay his hand on that which was given to him by his neighbor. The owner should accept the curse from him, and he does not pay. But if the animal was surely stolen from him, he should pay the owner. If it was surely broken, he should bring witnesses that it was broken, and he does not pay. If a man borrows it from his neighbor, and the object breaks or dies, its owner not being with it, he must surely pay. If its owner is with it, he does not pay. If it is hired, he loses his hire. If a man entices a virgin...
Let's stop right there. Slightly laborious, but what do we learn? The whole idea of, hey, you shouldn't have loaned it to me. It's your loss, doesn't pass, does it? Right? So if you borrowed something from someone and it was damaged or lost, you pay for that damage or loss. Pretty simple, right? There's also, in the first section, when it talks about an individual, it says, if a thief is found while burrowing in, he is smitten and dies, there's no blood guilt for him. If the eyewitness fell on him, there is blood guilt for him. He must surely pay. So we're talking about whether you're caught in the act and judgment is brought on you, then you received your judgment. If you're caught in the act and you're not beat up or whatever, then you are going to have to be responsible for what you've done. I would like to, let me see, I would like to stop at 14 for this class, and we'll pick up on verse 15 of chapter 22, because this is going to have some other context that I want to cover in other places as well. Hopefully we can get through, yeah, we should be able to get through it all in the next class. This concludes this portion of the class. Everyone say shalom to those who are watching.
Shalom.